Hello again! In this lesson, we'll discuss the VFB window for Corona renderer. I have a simple scene prepared. Let me open the last render so you can see what we have here. Okay, so this is the Corona VFB window. We can click Render here to render previews and final images. If we click and hold, we'll see other options. Start IR is the interactive rendering. You can see that when we change the view, it's automatically changing in the frame buffer. Now, if we want to save the image, we can click Save and then choose the format. But we can also click and hold, and we'll have other options as well. We can save all, so we can save all render elements we added. Now, we don't have any elements as Beauty and Alpha are always automatically here. So let me add a couple of random render elements. So if we start rendering again, you can see that we have these new elements added. So if we click Save All, we'll have all of these elements saved in the format we will choose. And lastly, we can choose Save CXR, which is a special Corona format. This file will include all passes and information from your post and light mix panel, so you'll be able to change it in this file as well as resume render from CXR. Remember that it's a big file and it takes a moment to save. Anyway, here we have a light mix panel that we'll discuss later on in this module. Now, when we click on the max icon, it will duplicate the frame buffer for us. So we can, for instance, compare different versions of the render. And we can copy the VFB a couple of times. This Ctrl+C icon simply copies the image from the frame buffer. And we can copy it, for example, to Photoshop. We just need to paste it. It's a good option during the production process before we render the actual preview for the client, for instance. Refresh button, as the name says, refreshes the render preview. Erase clears up the VFB, so you'll see just the black window. Tools button opens and closes the panel on the right-hand side. Region allows us to render only the part of the render we select. You can disable the region if you don't need it, or use Remove All, especially if you have more than one region selected. Pick option allows us to select options by picking them in the frame buffer. Handy option. Here, of course, we can preview all render elements. We can zoom in and out. And we can clear the zooming here. As mentioned previously, here is a light mix option, which we'll talk about later in the module. DR is a tab for distributed rendering if we'll render on a couple of computers instead of just one. History panel is great for testing, so we can save the current VFB, we can change something and save another version. We can also compare both results. We can select the image we want to have as A, click the left mouse button, and click with the right mouse button to set another image as a B. So we can easily compare two options. If we want to remove it, we just need to click on the crosses. Let me show you another thing. You can notice that we have 6 passes here. We can resume rendering from here. And now, we can save another version and resume again. Even when we change the view, here we can click to save the preview. This panel is for statistics, so we can read some things from here. The most important ones are passes total, which shows how many passes were rendered, and the noise level that shows us what level of noise was reached in the image. And finally, the post tab. Here we can adjust tone mapping, like exposure of the image, highlight, compress. Actually, let's change the perspective and let's start interactive rendering. So we can adjust exposure from this tab. We can also change highlight, compress, so if your whites are overexposed, you should increase this value. You can see that now it's not overexposed, but it's bright. Next one is for white balance. So values lower than 6500 will make the image more warm, and higher than this will make the image more towards blues. Green magenta tint is pretty self-explanatory. The higher the contrast value, the higher the contrast. Saturation. I typically desaturate my images a little bit to achieve a more natural look. I don't really use the filmic highlight option. I don't like the results too much. But I definitely use filmic shadows a lot. It controls the richness saturation of shadows in the image. With vignette intensity, we can create a vignette effect. I prefer to do this in post though. We can select the color tint of the image as well. And we can of course set curves here. And this one I also prefer to do in the post, but sometimes I use it here as well. We can choose different channels. Okay, Corona has its own LUTs, and we can choose from their list or use our own. They have quite a good choice, so it's definitely a good start. If you want to choose LUTs from your computer, you need to choose the right location. Now, bloom and glare effect. We can control the size of this. Bloom intensity, as well as a glare intensity. And these are the standard values to change. You can also change others, but these three are the must if you want to set this effect. We can also make the image more sharp or more blurred by checking this option. And adjusting the values. I don't really use it. And finally, denoising. To be able to change this value, we need to have the denoising mode chosen in the render setup. So we have the amount 0.65. And this will be the value set by default in the frame buffer. Let's re-render. And you can see that the denoising option is automatically turned on. And now we are able to control the noise value from here. So we can do it less or more denoised. Okay, and that's it. We have a whole Corona frame buffer discussed. In the next lesson, we'll talk about the V-Ray frame buffer. See you there!